In the hallowed halls of American justice, where truth is meant to be sacred and power is supposedly held in check, the unthinkable was about to happen. Live streamed to a nation of millions, a trial that was not a trial was set to destroy her. Career in minutes orchestrated by one of the most powerful figures in the country. What happens when the scales of justice are not just tipped, but thrown to the floor and shattered? You are about to find out. Before we delve into the heart of this explosive confrontation, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You will not want to miss a single moment of the story that follows. The air in the Washington, D.C. federal courtroom was so cold it felt like a physical weight. For White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, the chill was more than just the marble and steel. It was the icy premonition of an ambush. Summoned by a cryptic early morning email, she had walked through a gauntlet of reporters into a room that felt less like a court of law and more like a stage for an execution. The charge, as read by a stone-faced clerk, was a masterpiece of ambiguity, utilizing her position to disseminate misinformation for the benefit of political interests. It was a phantom, a charge with no body, no evidence, no substance. It was fabricated to perfection. Then she entered. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, robed in black, ascended the bench not with the solemnity of a jurist, but with the unassailable arrogance of a monarch. The room did not fall silent out of respect, but from a suffocating tension that choked the air. This was not her court, not her jurisdiction. This was an ethics hearing, yet she presided over it with an iron gaze, her presence a brutal declaration of power. "This isn't a trial," Leavitt's lawyer whispered, his voice tight with dread. "It's a trap." When Leavitt stood, raising a hand to speak, to ask for the simple right to defend herself, Barrett cut her off with the finality of a blade. "This is not a place for speeches," the justice declared, her voice devoid of warmth. The gavel struck. Not once, but twice. Then came the sentence, delivered without a flicker of emotion. "This court declares Karoline Leavitt is removed as press secretary and is barred from holding any public office in the federal government for a period of 8 years. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the gallery. But Barrett wasn't finished. Leaning forward, she added the final personal humiliation, her voice laced with a venomous calm. "You're not here for serving the public. You're here for partisan interests, for those behind you who want to cling to power." The words were designed to break her. But as Karoline Leavitt stood there, bathed in the harsh lights and the gazes of millions, she didn't crumble. Her shock hardened instantly into a diamond-sharp resolve. A memory, raw and unbidden, flashed through her mind. Being 17, pushed into the back of a police car after her shift at a grocery store, accused of looking like a suspect. That night, sitting in a cold holding cell, she hadn't learned to hate power. She had learned how it worked. The echo of the gavel faded, sealing a verdict meant to be her end. But as she met the justice's icy stare, Leavitt knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end. It was the beginning. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, having delivered what she believed was the final blow, called for a 15-minute recess. The command was laced with dismissal, an afterthought to a verdict she considered absolute. As lawyers stood in court, clerks moved like scattered insects. The press cause erupted into a frenzy of hushed but frantic whispers, speculating on the sheer audacity of the ruling. The legal drama was, for all intents and purposes, over. But in the quiet eye of the storm, Karoline Leavitt sat perfectly still, a statue of resolve carved from marble. This was not an ending. It was an intermission. As people began to file out, a ghost of a movement happened beside her. It was Emily Voss, her longtime associate and the only person in the room who understood the real game being played. Voss didn't look at her. She didn't need to. As she passed, her hand brushed Leavitt's, and in that fleeting contact, a slim file, sealed in discreet silver paper, was passed under the table. It was a gesture so quiet, so fluid, it was invisible to the dozens of cameras still rolling. Leavitt tucked it deftly under her legal notepad, her face a mask of impenetrable calm. With the courtroom partially empty, her fingers found the edge of the seal. She didn't tear it open. She opened it with the deliberate care of someone handling a sacred text. What she saw inside wasn't just evidence. It was a bombshell capable of leveling the entire institution. The first document was a detailed ledger, its columns neat and its implications devastating. Her eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the entries. A retreat at a private Colorado resort, value $40,500, paid by a conservative group called Liberty Vanguard. A $9,800 tuition grant for a family member, conveniently unreported. A priceless antique painting listed as a gift from an anonymous donor, valued at $65,000. Leavitt's heart didn't race. It anchored, growing heavier and steadier with each line she read. This wasn't rumor. It was paper, dates, and signatures. Then she reached the final page, the section marked in bold blue ink. It was a timeline comparison. On one side, 6 landmark Supreme Court rulings. On the other, a list of grants, gifts, and donations recorded. Within 7 to 12 days after each ruling, all linked directly to Liberty Vanguard's financial interests. The rot wasn't just on the surface. It was in the very foundations of the court. She leaned back, the weight of the truth settling on her not as a burden, but as armor. The American people had just seen her silenced, her career condemned in under an hour. But they hadn't seen power caught red-handed. And Karoline Leavitt was not one to let the truth die in a sealed silver file. As the court reconvened, the gavel struck, silencing the room. But before Barrett could speak, Leavitt rose, her stance resolute. "Your Honor," she said, her voice even, unmovable. "I respectfully request 3 minutes to clarify points regarding the record." Barrett's eyes narrowed. The trial was over. "There is nothing to add," she snapped. Leavitt didn't flinch. She simply said, her voice soft but sharp, "Then let the record show that concealing the truth doesn't erase it." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the justice's face. The press was watching. The world was watching. With a voice less certain than before, she muttered, 3 minutes. "Stay on point." Leavitt gave a slight nod. She stepped toward the microphone. File in hand, a fire burning within her that could no longer be contained. She wasn't there to beg for justice. She was there to deliver it. The 3 minutes granted by Justice Barrett were not an act of grace. They were a crack in the armor of tyranny, and Karoline Leavitt was about to drive a wedge through it. She walked to the microphone not with the hurried steps of a woman on borrowed time, but with the deliberate pace of someone who was now in command. The nation's eyes were on her, a silent sea of millions holding its collective breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power of her words came from their undeniable precision. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but ringing with a clarity that cut through the tense air. "Today, I was accused of abusing my role as press secretary to spread misinformation, a charge presented with no specific evidence. I was convicted without the right to self-defense. But what I hold here," she said, raising the slim silver file, "is a record. A record of unreported grants and benefits received by a sitting Supreme Court justice from organizations with direct financial interests in federal rulings." The statement didn't just hang in the air. It struck it, shattering the room's decorum. She began to read. A vacation at a private Montana villa, valued at $38,000, paid for by Liberty Vanguard. She paused, letting the words sink in. She hadn't looked at Barrett yet. Instead, she turned her head slightly, addressing the press, the gallery, the nation. A $59,000 art statue, gifted directly from a donor affiliated with the same organization, with a remote. She pressed a button. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the large screen behind the bench flickered to life. The first image appeared, unmistakable. Coney Barrett at a lavish Montana resort, a wine glass in hand, majestic mountains framing a scene of elite leisure. The image was time-stamped. "This is not a crime," Leavitt stated, her voice even. "But what happens when we pair it with this?" She clicked again. The second image appeared beside the first, an official court document, dated the very same day as the resort photo. It was the cover page of a ruling, Barrett v. Liberty Vanguard, a case tied directly to the interests of the very organization that had funded the trip. The contrast was a silent, screaming indictment. She moved on, displaying the meticulously detailed data table from the file, listing the rulings, the dates, and the corresponding gifts, but she had one more piece of her presentation. "Miss Sarah Linden, please step forward," Leavitt called out. A woman in a simple pale blue suit rose from the gallery. Her steps were deliberate, her face etched with the burden of a truth she had been forced to carry. She was a former court clerk, and as she approached the microphone, the room held its breath. "I was an administrative assistant to Justice Barrett," she began, her voice steady but restrained. "In early 2022, I was asked to delete records related to the justices. Trips to events hosted by Liberty Vanguard. I was told it was to streamline files. I refused. She looked up, her gaze finding Barrett's. 2 weeks later, my security access was revoked. A month later, I was fired. The courtroom didn't erupt. It collapsed into a silence so profound. It was almost a physical force. The confession seeped into every floorboard, every face. Even the security guards stood rigid, their certainty gone. Then, Leavitt turned her eyes to the woman on the bench. Coney Barrett was no longer sitting upright. She seemed to shrink into her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. Her once authoritative gaze now darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Leavitt let the silence stretch, becoming an undeniable verdict in itself. Finally, she spoke, her voice not triumphant, but clear as a bell, asking the question that would echo across the nation. "Your Honor," she said slowly, each word a hammer striking stone. "If I can be removed for unproven allegations while serving, the public, then who holds power accountable when power wears a robe?" The question hung in the air, an undeniable force that sucked the very breath from the room. Who holds power accountable when power wears a robe? The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of an entire system teetering on the brink. Coney Barrett, once the embodiment of untouchable authority, was now just a woman trapped in the wreckage of her own making, her face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. Then, like a controlled explosion, a new voice cut through the silence. It was firm, unwavering, and backed by the full weight of the federal government. "Madame Clark, please halt these proceedings." All eyes snapped to the government's table, where federal prosecutor Laura Hensley had risen. Her federal badge was pinned to her suit, a small star of authority that now outshone the fading aura of the Supreme Court Justice. Her voice needed no volume to command the room. "The Department of Justice," Hensley continued, her gaze fixed not on Barrett but on the court record, "requests an immediate suspension to review the newly presented documents and testimony." It wasn't a motion. It was an order. For the first time in her career, Coney Barrett looked at a prosecutor not with defiance, but with the slow, profound realization that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The game was over, and she had lost. Furthermore, Hensley added, her tone leaving no room for debate, "We will be opening a federal ethics investigation into conduct that may violate judicial codes. And based on this review, the Department of Justice finds no basis to continue prosecuting Press Secretary Leavitt. The charges lack merit and are dismissed from the record." Immediately, vindication. It wasn't loud or triumphant, but a quiet, clean severance from the injustice that had been inflicted upon her. With deliberate calm, Karoline Leavitt closed the silver file before her. She didn't smile. She didn't even glance at Barrett. Her stillness now carried more weight than any ruling. Barrett sat for a moment longer than necessary, her eyes vacant, scanning the room that no longer belonged to her. The cameras, still live streaming, zoomed in on her hands as they dropped from the bench to her lap in a gesture of utter defeat. She parted her lips to speak, but no words came. There was nothing left to salvage.so. She stood. It wasn't the stance of someone in control. It was the slow, reluctant walk of someone leaving behind what was irrevocably lost. She didn't request to step down. She didn't offer a closing statement. She simply turned from the courtroom she had commanded for an hour in the nation, for far longer, and stepped off the bench. Each movement was recorded, each step archived. The faint sound of her leather shoes on marble was the only sound in the frozen room. An echo of a downfall that would be replayed for decades. As the heavy door closed behind her, the collective gaze of the room, of the nation, shifted from the abandoned bench to the woman who never needed it to claim her authority. Karoline Leavitt didn't rise. She sat at the defendant's table, the very spot where they had tried to silence her, now transformed into a witness stand for truth. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the void. "Let it be clear," she began, her gaze sweeping the room. "I'm not here to take her place. I don't want that chair, its burden, or its shadows. I just want to live in a country where that chair, any seat of power, cannot be swayed by hidden grants or silence masquerading as tradition." In that moment, she wasn't speaking to the court. She was speaking to every American who had ever felt powerless and now finally had their answer, while Washington, D.C. convulsed, reeling from a political earthquake that had cracked the very foundation of its most sacred institution. Karoline Leavitt did not linger in the spotlight. She refused the endless calls from news networks and politely declined interviews that would have cemented her celebrity. Victory was not a destination. It was a starting point. The trial had exposed the disease. Now it was time to write the cure. Late into the night, fueled by coffee and a fierce, unwavering conviction, she became an architect. She didn't hire a team of high-priced lawyers or consultants. Alone, at a simple desk, she drafted the Judicial Transparency Act of 2025. The text was sharp, uncompromising, and stripped of political jargon. It was a blueprint for accountability, mandatory 6-month financial disclosures for all federal judges, an absolute protection clause for whistleblowers in the judiciary, and the establishment of a fully independent, nonpartisan oversight commission. With the power to investigate any judge, regardless of their title, months earlier, such a bill would have been dismissed as a fantasy. Now, it was an undeniable mandate. When it landed on lawmakers' desks, it was like a lightning bolt. Fueled by a public that had watched the drama unfold live, the bill gained stunning momentum. Signatures appeared first from progressives, then from moderates, and then, remarkably, from across the aisle. A viral video showed high school students in Minneapolis staging a mock trial, holding homemade gavels and chanting, "Leavitt's Law, clean the bench." This was no longer politics. It was a civic reckoning, but as her name dominated headlines and her bill was fast-tracked through Congress, Leavitt was not there to see it. She had returned to the only court that ever truly mattered to her, the community that gave her a mission. In a suburban Manchester community hall, under flickering fluorescent lights, she stood before folding chairs filled with veterans, single parents, and students. There were no cameras, no grand robes, just a whiteboard and questions handwritten on notepads. An older man, leaning on a wooden cane, stood and made his way to the front. His voice was not loud, but it was firm. "Karoline," he said, the room falling silent, "you didn't just take down one person." He paused, his eyes carrying the weight of a lifetime. "You pulled the whole system back to earth to remind it that it's supposed to serve people, not power." The words landed with more force than any gavel. No applause followed, only quiet. Profound recognition. This was her true victory. In that moment, Leavitt, who had faced down one of America's most powerful institutions, stood not above the people, but among them. The phrase, "you pulled the system back to earth," spread faster than any news report, becoming the unofficial slogan of a movement. It was a reminder that justice isn't bestowed from on high. It is demanded from below. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win a fight. She handed the nation a pen and said, "Write better laws." And so, the story of how one woman, armed only with the truth, faced an impossible power and changed the nation comes to a close. It serves as a stunning reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be silenced by it. The system is only as strong as the secrets it keeps, and one voice can be enough to bring the walls tumbling down. What did you think of Karoline Leavitt's incredible stand? Let us know in the comments below. If this story inspired you, please like this video, share it with others who need to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for more stories of truth against power.